an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering One Piece, episodes 552 through 554. A surprising confession, the truth behind the assassination of Otohime. Shihoroshi's tears, Luffy finally shows up, and a big clash, the Straw Hats versus 100,000 enemies. In these episodes, we get to see Luffy unleash his power on a big group, and it's even more impressive than I was thinking it was going to be honest. Also, it turns out the princess knew who killed her mom. Okay. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to, is it Florian today? Let me triple check for commissioning this episode. It is indeed. Thank you, Florian. So guys, okay, I sometimes can't help but start talking about things out of order because I just have very strong opinions or reactions to a certain plot point. And I'm going to say that for me, this reveal that the princess already knew doesn't feel right. Now, I when I say that, I'm not suggesting, that it's her lying or anything like that. I'm just saying, there was a sense for me of almost... I'm going to back up a little bit. So, the first of the 3 episodes is the one where Hordy confesses that he is the one who murdered the queen, which is what I had been theorizing. And I didn't expect at all that he was going to tell everybody about this. And honestly, it doesn't make a lot of sense that he did tell everybody about this, because the whole, takeover was predicated on the fact that we can't get along with humans, that it's been proven time and time again, we have to do our own thing, and I'm here to ensure that we don't start going down the wrong path with people who are dangerous for us. If you create that as your sort of platform, but then just coming out and confessing that you're the one who killed the beloved queen that was working on this, partnership between fishmen and humans, it doesn't really work for me. I think the way that this is supposed to be seen is simply that he has reached such a point of power so quickly that he is taking it for granted nobody's going to check him. I think it's supposed to be that he is maybe a little too cocky and confident and thought that blurting all of this out was going to be him pwning the populace, because he does sort of crow over it and be like, I can't believe you guys fell for it, the whole thing. So I think that's the way I'm supposed to see it. But I do find it, doesn't really make sense. It would be one thing if he was sort of... okay. I think Hordy as a villain is weak sauce. I'm just going to come out and just say that off the top so that you guys can kind of understand where I'm coming from here. I think this arc is weak sauce. And I may be proved wrong. There may be something that comes up later that it's going to be like, see, you didn't see that coming, did you? And I hope there is. I really do. But Hordy just standing in front of everybody, just proclaiming this and being out in the open with his bad guy self, it is so one-dimensional in comparison to the kinds of like subterfuge that I have gotten used to with certain other baddies, that I was genuinely a little disappointed at the fact that he seems so basic. Like, I'm not sure if this is a purposeful thing that we're supposed to be sort of hearkening back to Arlong, and this was sort of the way he rolled. So maybe that's it, and we're just meant to like be seeing the parallel here between the two of them as villains. But for me, it feels like this is the way that you play it when you've begun to run out of ideas, or you're just sort of phoning it in and you don't want to think that hard about how everything is happening. And I can't help but feel as if we should be past this sort of villain by now. We should be dealing with somebody who is a little more clever, a little bit more, what's the wording I want here? Somebody who feels like they are wise to I keep picturing Crocodile. I can't help myself. Crocodile was a very competent villain. That was part of what made him so effective, was that he was able to predict how a lot of people would react to things and what they would do and think. And he even just toyed with them because he could. And Horty just feels like a like playground bully. So I think everything that isn't working for me sort of starts there, with not really being impressed with him, not impressed with his plan, like the way that he is. He's so obvious, you know? So I think him blurting all of this out in front of everybody is meant to be him being overconfident. But because we have gone so far, we're almost at episode 600 here. We have been on this journey with the Straw Hats and seen them improve and grow in these ways that are beyond belief for a lot of the people that have run into them. Nobody seems fully prepared for what they are capable of doing now. And I was just wanting to see the same kind of growth with our villains, to see, and it's not exactly even about power. Like, you know, when I say that, I mean not necessarily that they have eaten a devil fruit, not necessarily that they are a badass fighter, maybe even explicitly not those things, because our friends have grown really strong in terms of an outright brawl. But are they more intelligent about the way that they approach conflicts and being able to predict the moves of certain like types of people? So I guess what I'm saying is I'm very pleased that they have reached a point where they can totally kick ass and take out 50,000 guys in a shot. Don't get me wrong. Deeply impressive, and like I said earlier, it was more than I was expecting for sure. However, that kind of power can only like be super interesting to watch for a limited amount of time before it's just the same punch, punch, punch kinds of fights over and over again, which become a little bit tedious to watch. So I think I was just sort of wanting there to be a different angle to this guy that they are coming up against as the first big bad since they have all taken off for 2 years and done their own thing and improved. And I was waiting throughout Horty's takeover for things to go in a slightly different direction with the way he was doing the takeover, and instead it's all as obvious as it has ever been. So the fact that he is blurting all of this out, it's much less about, like, this is a foolish thing to do, period, as it is, I was hoping we would have a villain at this point who wouldn't do this sort of, like, really big fumble, you know, something that is so blatant that you're like, yeah, but we've done this before, haven't we? Haven't we been here? And because of this, like, big speech that he's giving to try and make everybody feel like fools, I guess, forever trusting his word or believing that the humans were evil. Excuse me. I think he's got his 100,000 men, and he's just really not concerned that anybody is going to be able to do anything to him to stop him. So he's just rubbing it in everybody's faces. But then you come up against the way the princess reacts. So Shirahoshi there's a real moment of, like, pause and concern as she is hearing this news, and we know as viewers that she isn't in control of her power, and that she doesn't, like, that any sort of big trauma or shock that makes her really emotional could potentially hurt the people around her. Like, now, there may be an answer to this question, and I really wish there was somebody here in the chat, because I kind of feel as if I must have missed something. But Hori knows that Shirahoshi has this power to summon the Sea Kings. He doesn't know that she isn't in control of it, and yet he decides to, like, be really flagrant with his, like, crowing over this victory of fooling everybody in front of a girl that has this power and she's been, like, chained up, but that's really all. And I don't know if there is something about the way she's being restrained that I missed that would make it so that she can't summon those Sea Kings. Why would he take this route if he knows that she has this incredible power that is super dangerous? It just feels like he's really taking his life in his hands. And I don't get what his like motivation is here. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Shirahoshi, it turns out, knew that he had murdered her mother because her shark friend told her. Which, I do like in principle that she knew this, just because it adds a little bit of interest to the story, and everybody being fooled except for her is, like, it's something. You know, it mixes it up a little bit. But I really cannot figure out her not telling anybody about it. Her reasoning is ludicrous, in my opinion. And Hori, like, makes fun of her, but he makes fun of her in a, like, oh, because of a promise to a dead woman. And it's obviously meant that he is like, I'm going to make fun of you for honoring your dead mother's wishes because I don't hold anything sacred, and I think that your mother was an idiot already. And that's not the reasoning for me of why this is such a foolish move on her part. I understand why he would play it this way, to be as disrespectful as possible. Personally, though, what I'm feeling is like her explanation is that I thought that if I told everybody, they would hold a grudge against Hori. And that wasn't what my mother wanted. She didn't want her death to inspire hate. She didn't want people, like, looking for vengeance afterward. She wanted us to learn to coexist. And I want to know why this dumb bitch thought what her mother did want was for everybody's faith in humans to be fundamentally shaken because they thought her mother had been murdered by a human. That doesn't make any sense at all. So you decided that rather than people wanting to take vengeance on one man who was trying to assassinate your mother to unravel a whole peace treaty that was being worked on and a whole, like, coexistence. That was so terrible an outcome that you just decided to let everybody think that all human beings can't be trusted, which is explicitly what your mother has been working against for the last God knows how long. I'm sorry, but that doesn't fucking wash in any way. And it feels to me like the only reason we're really having her already know this is because the author didn't feel like this reveal could possibly happen without Shirahoshi calling the Sea Kings. And he needed it to be less of a shock to her so that she wouldn't get over emotional and put everybody else in danger. That's what it feels like to me. Florian just got here, so people listening, forgive me, I'm going to repeat a couple things because I'm genuinely a little bit confused. Florian, help me out here. Is the way that the princess being held prisoner in chains, does this do anything to keep her power of summoning the Sea Kings from working? And if it doesn't, which I don't think it does, but I may be wrong, I may have missed something, I would say if it were a type of power that comes from a devil fruit, that this might be, the sea stone kinds of chains, but that's not what her power is, so that isn't it. And so if there isn't anything restraining her power, Horty announcing to her that he's actually the one who murdered her mother, when he knows what her power is and thinks that she has control of it, is idiotic and makes no sense. That's just my first one. And my second one is her motivation for keeping it secret that she did know, in fact, that Horty had killed her mother and not some human. Her explanation for, I didn't want people to hold a grudge against Horty because it's not what my mother would have wanted. And instead deciding to sacrifice the potential peace between humans and fishmen that her mother had been working toward for like a decade. That doesn't make any sense either. Why, holding on to a grudge against Horty is not a good enough reason to keep that to yourself when everything else that your mother has worked for falls apart due to what people believe and delays the forward progress of the relationship between humans and fishmen by ages. So my thesis here is that the only reason she knew about it ahead of time was so that she wouldn't get so emotional at the reveal that Horty had done it, and that way there won't be a scene where she accidentally summons the Sea Kings because she's just overwhelmed by her grief and horror at this thing. So I just it's a shame because I have been enjoying these episodes, but I feel like now that we've gotten to this point and we're really starting to see how Horty operates, I have lost a lot of respect for the plot overall, and I'm just feeling really frustrated because all of the motives behind certain things are weak as hell. And it's one thing for one motive to be really weak, and you're like, okay, well, I get it. That had to be sort of contrived for a thing to happen. But at this point, it's so many things that feel really contrived that the whole story really doesn't work. Florian says, and he's truly blinded by hatred. That's how I take his character. So he's clear enough that he knows he needs to take her out because of her ability. But he's stupid enough to still inadvertently maybe bait her so that she could take all of his people out using Sea Kings. That doesn't really work. And Florian says in the second one, I think is just that she's a child, but also not happy with that. Yeah, it doesn't... Like I said earlier, Horty makes fun of her for being stupid and not telling anybody, but he makes fun of her because of her honoring the promise she made to her mother, because the whole point of him mocking her is meant to be how disrespectful he is of her mother's memory and all of that. When really, mocking her, I would also, but for very, very different reasons, which don't really get brought up. Her mother's whole life was dedicated to this, attempt at peace between the two of them. And her just being willing to throw that away to keep the secret about Horty, it doesn't work at all. And then, considering that Horty has come back and has taken her father prisoner, and she still hasn't told anybody, well, now, what are you doing? So it just seems like we're coming up with a reason that she will be able to hold it together when he does this big confession. And that way we don't have to deal with any inconvenient outbursts of her ability, because the author doesn't want that to happen yet. So this is just the beginning of the issues that I'm having with this. And I will say that personally, because I already knew that Horty had been the one to kill her, I was like, yeah, okay, can we get on with this? And we spend a lot more time with this than I was expecting, because we have to go back and see the way that he sets all of this up, and the way that he gets some human drunk and, puts this person right in the spot that he needs so that he can frame him. And it's a human, so he doesn't care, but obviously he clearly doesn't care either way. Whether or not it's a human or a fish man, if he decides that you are worth killing, then that's all. He doesn't take any consideration in anything else. So this all of this is mixed in with some other things that are being revealed. First of all, because the princess is dumped in front of him and has been captured, a lot of the townsfolk are sort of confused because they had thought Luffy was the one who kidnapped her. So wait, why is she being re-kidnapped? Because we thought he was working with you. And Jinbei's with them, and we know he's not working with Horty. So was Jinbei trying to rescue her from Straw Hat, but just got her trapped? And Horty is this is when he's the only concern I have left is the Straw Hats. Although I'm sure they're more than a little preoccupied at the moment, trying to find a way into the palace. He really still thinks that they are going to go and find their friends who will have drowned according to his plan. And he is not concerned about them at all. We find out later, of course, that they were able to get out of this because they managed to get Papagu to listen. I say they, Brooke really is the only one. He manages to get Papagu because he uses his name. Papagu's wait a second. Why, how could this ghost know my name? And honestly, personally, I'm if it's a ghost, that's already them doing something that I didn't think was possible. So I'd be perfectly willing to accept that a ghost knows my name, because they're already capable of some shit that's wild and out of pocket. Florian says, I did not see this coming when I first saw this. Who killed the queen, I mean. So you were really surprised by this reveal. I'm sorry if anybody was looking forward to me being surprised and I just knew what was going on right away and took the fun out of it. But, this one felt for me kind of a classic setup. And especially because of the way in which it was like at this pivotal moment. But, so we begin to see all of these people who are being led in at gunpoint. And we find out that Horty has a bunch of slaves, human slaves, 30,000 of them that he has forced to fight. They have become part of his army. This is sort of a weird thing because I know that that slave armies have been a thing, but it's really difficult for me to comprehend how an army built out of people who don't want to be here, basically. How do you set them loose to do the fighting without them just fucking bailing and screwing you over? And this is not, when I levy this accusation or this sort of like question, it's not against the show. I really am curious, like, how do you get a slave army to work for you instead of trying to flee and leave you stranded with your dick in your hand? I don't really get that. And this is 30,000, and then he's got the fishmen who are actually trained in combat, and he has 70,000 of them. Y'all, does this seem like more fishmen than really should exist to anybody else? I think that the numbers are not just shocking in the sheer, quantity, but it's also, where have you gone to find 70,000 fishmen? Are you all supposed to be able to coexist on this island? Like, I don't mean coexist because obviously later on he tells all of the townspeople, like, so you're going to have to give up your houses to my guys, so, but I like the scope of how much planning would have had to go into this and the length of time it would take and the size of the army that he winds up with. It's more than I thought the whole population of Fishman Island was. And I may just have really underestimated the size of the island. I think that I was considering the island a sort of like my hometown and the town next door, which I think would add up to about 60,000 people, because my hometown's pop is like 20. And the next one I would be willing to hazard a guess it's double that. But I think this is also something that comes up for me in One Piece a lot, is like the size of things, because of how fast and loose we play with the size of buildings, the size of people versus other people, depending on what their power levels are. Some people just turn out to be huge. And just a lot of this stuff, I can't ever really get a good handle on it. But yeah, he leads all of these people out, and it's just, really meant to dampen everybody's hopes and be really discouraging, because there are so many. How are we supposed to stand up against them? And he says there are also people outside the walls, women and children. They can't fight, but I'll find a use for them later. And maybe I'm tempted to like sort of give a little bit of credit to the author and infer here that this is just Horty being misogynist and shitty, but I can't really do that in good faith, because the armies everywhere that we have seen are always all dudes. Women aren't ever fighters unless they have a superpower. And I have got to say, it's bumming me out a little bit at this point, guys. It really is. Like, the only fighters that we have seen have been the ones that are on Maiden Island, And the whole thing with them is that they don't really go anywhere and mix with men. So they are still sort of, it's almost a superpower, you know, it's still a special case. And I feel like we could have a mixed bunch and it would be okay. Like, why are we so afraid of doing this? So yeah, for him to just be like, oh, and they can't fight. And I'm like, can't they? How do you know? Why would you, like, not want to exploit every able body that you had at your disposal at this point, you know? And I should mention, too, that Horty is sitting on this huge throne, and it's, like, exactly his size, and I was sort of like, is he meant to be the same size as the king? Was this already here? I wanted to see, like, how this thing appeared, because Horty has grown from... I said this last time, and I don't feel like I got, like, a completely concrete answer, but I have been under the impression that Horty's transformation into his, like, albino version of himself also made him gigantic. So this is when Charlie shows up. The woman who has visions, and she has a strange, almost forked tail. It's not quite, because that tail is like a crescent. But it is a really cool design. She shows up to tell him that I had a vision of the destruction of our island brought on by a single man. And it's kind of funny because, like, I expected Horty to be more like, I'm not destroying, I am freeing, you know, like, I am doing something that you guys don't have a proper appreciation for, but eventually you'll thank me. I thought it was going to be that sort of, like, what's the word I want? Like, rationalization. Instead, he seems pretty happy with the suggestion that he is so important that he could accomplish destroying the whole island. And he says, I guess you could call what I'm doing destruction, and gets this little, like, grin on his face, and then says, so was it me you saw in the prophecy? And she tells him no, and he does not like hearing that. And she tells him, the man that I saw is Straw Hat Luffy. And Horty says that can't be. And she says, oh, but I'm afraid it can. That said, I don't know how. The means are a mystery to me. And he says, so what's my point? And she says, it's not for you. My point is, no matter what you think you're accomplishing, the person who decides the fate of this island isn't you. It's a human. And everybody around her is like, well, she's never fucking wrong. So all of this coming together means that Horty won't ever truly be in control of the island. I appreciate wanting to think that's what this means, but that's not exactly true, is it? Because saying, like, Luffy is the one who's going to be responsible for what happens to the island, she freely says later that she has no inkling of when something is going to happen. She will see the outcome, but she can't predict the date, and she can't predict the means. So everybody being like, oh, well, if that's true, it means that Horty isn't going to be able to, like, manage to take us down. That's jumping to a whole lot of conclusions that I don't feel like you should be, my friends. I feel like there's plenty of room for Horty to take over the island and run shit for a little while, and then Luffy be the one to, like, do something that... And it's weird because they sort of eventually get to a point where they're like, okay, why don't we root Luffy on and get him here as fast as we can, because we don't really care what happens to the island as long as he takes Horty out. Which is a very strange direction to go in. I thought it was going to be, like, well, now we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We've got this guy who is, taking our homes away, who it turns out is a huge liar and killed our queen. And instead, it's, well, Luffy, we need you, even if you, tear this island apart, we don't care. Just please come as soon as you can. And I was like, that is a really odd direction to go in. That they're sort of implicitly saying that they are okay with their own destruction as long as he stops Horty, which is a very big leap to make when you don't even know how things are meant to go yet with all of how Horty is going to set things up for your the situation of living on this island. Most people aren't that type of, I don't even know if I want to say it. It's selfless, exactly. Self-sacrificing, I guess. And they certainly aren't this way immediately upon something like this happening, because most of us are going to kind of try and keep our heads down and stay as focused as we can and try and see whether or not we can make it through this just as is. And so, yeah, they just really do this weird heel turn where it's we don't mind that Luffy's going to destroy the island as long as he destroys this guy as well. And it just feels very abrupt to me. So this is when Horty ends up telling them all about how he killed the queen, and he is very proud of himself, and we have Shirahoshi saying, I knew. And then the episode ends and we jump to the next one, and she confesses that she knew already and that her friend, the shark Megalo, told her. And then her really, really weak sauce fucking explanation of why she didn't tell anybody. It's asinine. It doesn't make any sense. And then and her brothers all hearing this are just all these years and I was like, yeah, that's kind of fucked up. They're kind of admiring, it sounds like, the fact that she kept this bottled up and didn't tell anybody and so bore the burden of it, but that doesn't ring true for me. I think all of them would be are you fucking kidding me? The reaction of everybody to this is much more tolerant in a sort of way that means oh, well, we understand. We know what it was that you were doing, and you were trying to honor our mother's wishes, and that was you took on this burden in order to uphold the promise that you made, and so we admire that. But I am so sorry. Absolutely fucking not. Somebody has to be mad at her. It doesn't ring true at all that everybody is oh, what a selfless saint she is for taking this on and holding this secret. There has got to be somebody amongst them who is what the fuck is the matter with you? Her not wanting people to go around with hate in their heart is not the same thing as not holding a murderer responsible. That's not at all the same thing. She's talking about racism, and you're talking about a single assassin that you just fucking let get away with it. What do you mean? But nobody calls her out on this. Nobody disagrees with her, in a way that feels like they're admonishing her. And maybe that will happen later, but I don't really think it will, because their first reactions would be what I would expect to display that sort of irritation, and we don't see it from anybody. Florian says, I think what the people think with Horty will be oppression, and they live like this for years, and lately it has been on an upswing. They'd rather choose destruction than going back. I take it that way, at least. And I think that's what we're meant to be, but I think that's what we're meant to think here, but I don't think it rings true. I just don't. That's not really how people work. People will scrape by, and as long as they are able to survive and their close family are able to like stay alive, we will put up with a lot before we are ready to destroy ourselves and destroy our families. You know, the people who are like, we don't care if you tear this island apart, they're saying this also about their spouses and their siblings and their children. That is just not reality. And I like, because this show waffles so wildly between the way that they want to portray the average person and how like moments like this hit, sometimes we do see that like the attitudes of the average person are venal and selfish and sort of base. But here, all of a sudden, everybody is like understanding Shirahoshi's motivation, and everybody is like, yeah, we are all willing to sacrifice ourselves as long as Luffy comes in. I find this so basic. This plot is like from the first 100 episodes. This doesn't feel like after everything our friends have been through. They deserve better than this. It doesn't make any sense coming from any direction. And everybody being so in sync with how they feel things should be handled. It's because we have put Horty in this position where he is basically standing on a stage in front of everybody. We have to have it be that everyone's united against him. But we could have just not had him standing on this stage, blatantly telling everybody what a terrible person he is and how much he delights in it. We could have done something so much more interesting with him as a character. And instead, we just sort of went back in time and did like Arlong but worse. And it's played. We've been here before. It's not interesting to watch. It doesn't make him a fun character. I'm not really feeling threatened by him or worried about him. And all of the townsfolk being equally like on this like, we can't believe what you did to our queen, and we all were trying to make it. Some of the people who live in this town should be on his side a little bit. Some of the people should be like, you know what, you're right. I didn't even want to sign it, but people were pressuring me, but I felt like we can't trust humans. And he should be cultivating that and not telling them that he committed the murder, because it pays for him to get them on his side and believing in this. It doesn't make sense that he would confess to everybody in front of them all so that they all know that he's a massive liar and that their hatred that has been in their hearts for humans is invalid in a lot of ways. He's just turning more people against him in a moment that is, oh, well, he's just not that smart a villain. He's just overwhelmed by his rage and desire for power. Boring. That is so boring. It's just, we deserve better as viewers at this point, and the Straw Hats deserve way better for a villain that's like the first one they're really going to be going up against since they advanced after 2 years of training. It feels like a regression in every sense. So this is just not it, guys. It's just not it. I'm sorry. I don't like to be hard on this show for things that I feel like I need to be able to let go of, because to a degree it's a cartoon, to a degree it's a heightened reality, this world that they're living in, and the ways that certain things would work are irrelevant to the show. But because of the way that this plot is constructed around a very real allegory for racism, you better be fucking careful the way you decide to set this up, and they are not being careful. And it's not a satisfying payoff to like have it be this sort of ghoulish dude who's in the background manipulating everybody, and then just pulls the curtain back and is like, haha, it was me. If you really want your people to take control and to mistrust humans, what Horty should have been doing was framing more humans for more awful things. This would be so much more fascinating for me to watch, that like we're hearing about the terrible things that humans have done to fishmen, and then eventually we find out that almost all of those things were Horty gathering supporters, but then framing humans for it so that there could be this like trail of destruction behind him that was entirely hidden from view of fishmen because they thought it was just more persecution from humans when in fact it was somebody who was organizing a coup. And so they then realize everything that was set up, we've been played repeatedly, that this whole history that we have in our heads of the way humans have treated us, some of it's true, but a lot of it isn't, and we don't know what's what. We can't tell. And that makes for a really complex conversation on how much do we let humans off the hook for? How much do we realize now Horty orchestrated? How much of it was him orchestrating, and how much of it were human beings fighting back against him? And maybe they're being atrocities, but they were actually in self-defense. So now what? How does that look? All of this, for me, would be like a slow build of hearing about him and seeing him at work, and then coming here and seeing that all of it was him and that he has organized this really well put together, thought out coup, and isn't not putting any of his cards on the table in letting anybody know about this except for like his top people. They're the only ones that get to find out. And then you have this sort of like, well, it feels justified that he's doing this coup because the king isn't doing anything because he is so bound to the promise of his like wife and his children that he feels like he can't fight back the way he wants to. And his own people are getting frustrated with that he is losing support among his own people because they are seeing him just take no action whatsoever, so that when Horty comes in, he's supported. The coup is something that they want. And it's not until it's too late and he is fucking in that they begin to find out a lot of the things were set up. And once he's established, that is a much, much harder villain to deal with. This dude who's just standing outside the palace with the king and fucking like blurting out his whole plan to everybody and just really feeling himself on the fact that he fooled them all. This is not a villain that I am worried about. This dude is a fool. He's going to be taken down, no problem. I am not at all concerned that there are going to be other people that have his back because he has alienated everybody around him except for like his guys. But those aren't guys I'm worried about either because it just all feels so like thrown together. So this is just so frustrating because it has the potential to be a really, really interesting situation where, if anything, we could have the Straw Hats coming to Fishman Island after the coup. Horty is already in place. The king has been, if not like actually executed, he could have been exiled. And there could be a whole other thing going on with him, like with the crew uncovering what has happened. Or we could even have it be that they don't go right to Fishman Island from Sabaody, that there are some things happening on Sabaody that they are hearing about, and they find out like, oh, these horrible things that humans have been doing to fishmen, and so they head down there to like offer their help and services and be like, can we team up with you because we think this is wrong? And then they get there and it's this guy who pretends to be welcoming and to be on like in good faith. And what if they get kind of bamboozled by him and find out that the things that they have been sent to do, it's actually not in defense of the fishmen. He's just using them as another group of humans who are screwing over fishmen because he had them do something that it turns out was like actually looking pretty evil from the outside. I just think there is so much here that you could work with that could be so much more intricate, and considering the way that like racism was at the center of this plot, racism is a really complex situation in real life. And I'm not saying that we have to do anything like the intensity of the situation in real life. I'm saying that it's complex because it has its gray areas. It has its people who, while they understand that another race may not necessarily be all bad people, they still have this like innate loyalty to their own race that they can't really seem to put away. Or the way that systems get put into place, and then you can find ways to like exploit that system, or the ways in which that system are almost unbreakable because of the human beings involved and their biases. And there's just so much that could be done. And so him just like blathering on gleefully, the fact that Luffy takes as long as he does to come out of the shark's mouth, the whole thing we find out later is that the argument between Jinbei and Luffy about, well, I want to go fight, and I know you told me that I can't because I'm going to make people angry because I'm a human, but I have to do what's right, and they're also hurting my friends, so this is personal for me. All of it, it turns out, is sort of like, again, another moment of Jinbei actually kind of meaning something else and taking his fucking sweet ass time getting to the point. So I am the one who let Arlong out. Fucking 3 episodes later, we finally get the story on what happened with that. And then you can't go fight because a human is going to look bad. And like 2 episodes after that, so what they need is a hero and you're going to save the day. Come on. Come on. This is all so contrived. It's all just like, I feel like if one of these things were happening, it wouldn't be so egregious. But every part of what's going on is so like first draft. You know what I'm saying? So it turns out that Jinbei is like, you need to be able to prove to them that you're a hero, so we're going to hide you in this shark's mouth so that they don't see you, and then you can swoop in and save the day as a hero. I don't know if I'm alone in this, but if I found out that a person with the powers Luffy has had been hiding in that shark's mouth this whole time, and had just let this man continue to talk and let this whole thing go on and on, I don't feel like I would really see him as a hero the way I'm meant to by Jinbei's plan. It just would feel like, why did you wait? You were here the whole time? Then what are you doing? I would be deeply confused and frustrated by that. So if we had set it up that like Luffy was hidden somewhere like nearby, or that he had to meet them, or something that like delayed him in a real way, but because of the fact that it was the conversation between him and Jinbei and this was the plan the whole time, that doesn't work. I would like for Jinbei to have just tried to put his foot down, and Luffy to be like, I know I told him I wasn't going to interfere, and I let him go off with the princess, and he's going to just think I'm staying here. The fuck I am. I am definitely getting there, and I'm going to help. I am just letting him get a bit of a head start because I don't want him to fucking stop me. And then by the time he gets there, shit is begin to pop off and he can jump in as a hero and really look like a hero who has run in to save the day, and not just some weirdo who's hiding in a corner until things actually like get bad enough that he can make himself look good. It just feels very like everybody is misunderstanding the way that human beings react to things. And so because the story needs people to react a certain way for the next piece of the plot to work, all of our people are just not reacting like people. It just feels like none of the human nature, for lack of a better term, although these are fishmen, human nature gets brought up a lot in this show, and the way that people behave and how fear can keep people from doing the right thing, or they can get caught up in a sort of mob mentality. And then like, that is just completely not part of the plot here at all. Sorry, Florian says, yeah, I'm going to tell you, the fandom thinks Horty is one of the least interesting villains in the show. Yeah, and like, it really, it almost makes you think, and it's not really a one-to-one comparison here because of the way that this show has done this in the past. So I'm not accusing the show of doing this with Horty the way I am accusing other properties, because this is just how One Piece works. But when I am thinking about a character like Horty, I think of course, Killmonger from Black Panther. And there were a lot of think pieces that came out around when the movie dropped where people were pointing out the fact that, like, Killmonger actually has valid points across the board until he gets into power, at which point he is suddenly abusing women, at which point he is suddenly encouraging the murder of children. And that it's very obvious the show is like, or the movie is like, well, we need him to be a baddie that you can sympathize with, right up until the point where he needs to be a baddie that we have to take out. And then we're going to turn all these knobs and flick all these switches so that there's suddenly a whole bunch of beliefs that he never mentioned before that you can be like, okay, but that's really fucked up. And it makes the whole attempt to have him be a villain you can identify with a little bit and understand ring very hollow, you know, and it kind of comes across as lazy. And I feel like they're trying to do that a little bit with Horty, but because like none of his points have really been valid, like human beings have abused fishmen, but he's framing them as well. There's a lot about this that once you reveal yourself, then your whole motive falls apart. So anyway, I'm sorry, guys, I'm getting bogged down in this. And I've talked about, like, what's going on in these episodes, like the first two, pretty well, as much as they need. But then we get the reveal of Luffy jumping out of the shark's mouth. We get Nami, and it turns out, of course, that Brook and Usopp and Zoro even got away, so they wind up joining us. And there's just a whole, like, sort of montage of all of them strutting, I guess, is the word I want. And the people around them being like, well, are you on our side or not? Did you kidnap the mermaid? Like, what's going on? Is this are we supposed to be glad you're here or not? And I was sort of confused because they were just yelling, Luffy, come help us. We don't care if you destroy the island. Just stop Horty. But then when his, like, cohorts show up, everybody's suddenly like, tell us whose side you're on. Tell us what you want with us. Tell us why you're here. Y'all didn't seem to care like 5 minutes ago. And now you're yelling all these questions. It feels a little bit late to ask when you begged them to come. So what is it? Do you want to know? Do you care or not? It doesn't, you know, like, these just don't go together. And I forgot to mention, of course, that Horty, like, shoots, I put in quotes, the seer who told him that he wasn't going to be the one to like destroy the island. But it's nothing, even though it's a real dramatic moment of him, like, shooting her. She's fine and just gets up here, and it turns out was, like, knocked out or something, in a way that I'm once again sort of, well, what are we meant to think about this villain if he's not actually, he's, like, shooting at the princes and the king, and evidently that's not really doing anything either. And so Horty, just in every sense, is just not somebody that I am intimidated by at all, you know? So the long montage of everybody showing up is, like, carried into the next episode, the third one, and it is a lot of that, of everybody, like, getting into position and talking about why they're here and what's happened so far. It takes a really long time for everybody to, like, get into place. And the whole thing with, like, going up against the 100,000 doesn't happen until the very end of all three. But all the people in town are like, well, they're super outnumbered. How is this going to happen? Like, there's no way that they can come out of this. And Luffy had, like, when he erupted from the shark's mouth, he just knocked Horty down. And it doesn't seem like the pirates are worried about that, which Chopper brings up. And it's because they have this drug, you know? So this is when all the pirates begin to circle Luffy, and he just gets that expression on his face, and we see all of them with their weapons lifted, group by group, their eyes turning white and them falling to the ground, and Luffy just standing in the middle of a carpet of bodies, and not a soul has been able to touch him. And I'll say that I really didn't think he could affect that many people, so that was a fun reveal that he is this strong. But because everything around it feels so silly, it's just like robbed of the gravity that this moment should have, and it doesn't hit like it would if I had been worried in the first place. And basically that was like half the pirates that have gone down, and Horty has a look on his face like he genuinely has no idea what to make of this. 50,000 people and they didn't even get in arm's reach of him. And of course all of the townsfolk looking around and being like, wait, what did he do? So then Luffy says, your name's Horty, right? I'm about to kick your ass. You want to become the king of a country or whatever? Fine, I don't care. But king of the pirates? Nuh-uh, that's my job. And then we go to be continued. So all I can say, guys, is I really hope we're closing in on the end of this arc, because it feels like we've squandered the interesting parts of it. And Horty is even less interesting than I thought. And I'm just disappointed. I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed. What can you do? They can't all be winners. All right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you guys again so much for listening. And share your thoughts in the No Spoilers channel on Discord if you are inclined. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.